let's go ahead and get started here. First of all, I just want to thank everyone for joining us on our third webinar series, where today we're joined by a very special guest. And before we get into introductions, just a couple of quick notes. We have a lot to cover about you. We have a lot of questions, but I do believe our question box is open. If people want to submit questions, we'll see what we can do to either get to them before the end of this session, or maybe afterwards we can email you some answers if we don't get a chance to get to them within time. Real quick, my name's Andrew Golden, and I'm the Director of Business Operations for Athlete Intelligence. For those of you where this is your first webinar or haven't heard of Athlete Intelligence before, we are a head impact monitoring and performance tracking solution. For more on us, feel free to visit our website, athleteintelligence.com. Where you can request a demo and learn more about the safety and performance things that we're doing within contact and collision sports. So now, let me formally introduce our guest today, Laurent Duvernay-Tardif. Thank you for joining us today. A man of many titles, current NFL offensive guard for Kansas City Chiefs, Doctor of Medicine. You're on the board of advisors for Athlete Intelligence, and also on the NFLPA's task force. Did I miss anything?
No, that's kind of summarized.
and for those of you that don't follow Laurent on Instagram, I gotta say, you seem pretty active with your woodworking skills. You're also a chef in the kitchen, so it seems like you've definitely figured out how to stay busy.
Well, you know what? I think it's one of the important thing right now is to not let your mind drift too much, and while you're home and you got to like figure out how to spend time at home, I feel like, for me at least, the best way to stay kind of optimal throughout my day is to build a schedule, and to find new hobby, find stuff to do, like read and try to stay away from, TV and Netflix and all that stuff. So for sure it was a challenge, at the beginning of this isolation and social distancing. I was going crazy a little bit, and I feel like at the beginning it was all about, my stuff, the thing that were canceled, like my problem. But you know what? At the end of the day, I'm still really privileged in all this. I don't have like 3 kids to do like homeschool and work on Zoom all day, and I think it's I'm okay. So at that point, I kind of like turn around and be like, how can I help? And over the last 6 weeks, I've been working in a long-term care facility in Montreal, Canada, and it's intense. It's different for sure, but at the same time, it gives you that purpose and that sense of, it's so rewarding to fight this thing along people that have been there for the past 30 years. So it's that's how I spend my days these days.
That's good. Staying busy is good. Now, I certainly want to learn more about your day today, but you have a really unique story, which we'll get into. But first, regarding your football career, you were born in Canada. You played at McGill. How was that transition from football in Canada to then coming and playing football in the States?
I'm feeling like you have an idea of my answer, but I play at McGill University. McGill's a really good academic school. Our football program is not so good. I think my last year I went like 1-8 or something like that. So not a really big powerhouse when it comes to football. And also like just the rules are different. I was playing offensive lineman, and you have a yard in between the ball and the defensive lineman. You have like 3 down instead of 4. So the whole like game plan is different, because it's more like pass oriented. The feel is different. So when I got drafted, I was for 1 minute, I was like, yeah, I made it. And then right after that, I was like, all right, now it's time to like learn a new playbook, learn technique, learn how to communicate with people, because my English was not that good at the time. Now it's getting a little better, but still, it was a big transition for me, that's for sure.
Now, not only were you balancing your college football career, but you were also balancing medical school. So how did you find yourself being able to do both of those?
Well, that's kind of interesting, because when I first got to McGill, everybody was telling me like, with English and with medical school and everything, it's going to be too hard to do both at the same time. Like there's no way you can play football. And I listened to those people. Like I stopped playing football once I got to McGill in medicine. And at some point I felt like I was missing something. I was missing that balance between, some cerebral work and some like really intense physical work. So I got back on the team, and it's actually at that time that I told myself, like, no matter what happened, I want to keep doing this. And here we are, so 8 years later, 10 years later with a Super Bowl and a doctorate in medicine. And that's my biggest accomplishment. I think it's yes to win the Super Bowl, but to do it while staying, a student athlete, and to graduate and get your MD, and it was tough. And when I was at McGill, I had to do both at the same time. I had to combine my football season with, seminar and classes and rotation in hospital setting. But then when I got to the NFL, I think that the hardest thing was actually to transition, going from playing in the NFL in front of 80,000 people to, the week later after the season's over, being a medical student on a psychiatric, floor in an hospital. So the transition has been for sure the most challenging part of my journey.
Right. So what came first? Your goal of playing in the NFL or goal of becoming a doctor?
I mean, when you're a Canadian, if you have a dream of playing a professional sport, it's hockey. So
yeah. Did you play hockey growing up?
A little bit, but I was not really good on skate. And I think, when you're over 300 pounds, football fits you better. But anyway,
top heavy on skates, huh?
oh yeah. But yeah, so the point being, I think I was shooting more for medicine or engineering. I was kind of debating between the two, and it's really after my second year in college that I really saw like a potential to get to the pros. And it's at that point also that I start making more sacrifice and kind of putting medicine on hold in order to go train in the States, trying to like get as many eyes to like watch you play during my last season, and that's how I got to the draft and got drafted by Kansas City.
Now, did you start playing at youth or high school, or I don't recall which level you started playing football at?
I started at 13 years old.
13 years old.
Yeah, which is kind of early for people in Montreal, but I know in the States it's like super late. But yeah.
Now, and you do a lot with like youth football camps, right? Didn't you start a little circuit, what was it, last year, a couple years ago? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, football is my passion, and you hear so many stuff about, concussion and injury and negative press about, football, especially at the youth level. And I don't want to say like you don't need to play football when you're a kid. That's not what I'm saying, but I'm just saying like, when you do start playing football, it's important to do so with the right technique and approach a game with the right mindset. Like at the end of the day, I think contact is kind of the result of the ultimate goal, which is to move the ball forwards toward the end zone. And sometimes, especially at the youth level, coaches are more, talking about hitting people as hard as you can. And it's not, I don't know. I feel like there's a way to use the physicality of the sport without necessarily trying to just hit somebody as hard as you can. And when you do that, I feel like you're decreasing the chance of injury. And at the end of the day, that's what's going to make you a good football player, is if you avoid injury and you're able to stay on the field.
Yeah, no, that's true. So you started playing football when you were 13, played in high school, played in college, played in the NFL, have a Super Bowl. Fast forward to today, can you tell us a little bit about how your schedule's changed both as an athlete and now also as a doctor?
Yeah, I mean, I think it changed for everybody, but for me, like going from winning the Super Bowl and then, celebrating and coming back home and doing like, all the media, the interview, and really like digesting that win. And then at some point going on vacation for 2 weeks and then coming back, and then it's a totally different picture, where like the school are closed, everything is shut down, no more activity through my foundation, no more conference, no more PR engagement or anything. And, with this pandemic, I don't know, I feel like it to a certain extent, it's bigger than football, and actually, it is bigger than football. And my first reaction was like, how can I help? How can I be part of the solution? And because I was kind of in a gray zone when it comes to my medical training, because I'm done with medical school, I got my MD, but I didn't get through residency, which is kind of the specialty program yet. So it was hard for me to just go back in hospital setting and work in the ER department or something like that. So the first thing I did was actually to just relay the message from public health authority through media and kind of use my platform to reinforce the fact that, back in March, April, we had to like stay home in order to, diminish the spread of the virus. And then at some point there was that opportunity to go back in long-term care facility that were hit really hard by the pandemic and actually provide some help. And I signed up for it. And here I am, 6 weeks later, and I'm working around like 2 to 3 shifts a week, which is not that much, but when you add to that, the training and the other engagement, it's adding up pretty quickly.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah, and it's long day, like it's exhausting, but it's also taking a toll, like emotionally, because in a nursing home or in a long-term care facility working with the elderly, there's not a lot of positive stuff happening on a day-to-day basis. Like people are going there and eventually going to die there, and it's either from COVID or something else, but at the end of the day they're still gonna probably die. And it's not about treating them, it's about making them comfortable and making sure that they preserve their dignity in the process.
The strong quality of rest of life. So that's good. Why was it so important for you to get involved on the front lines of the pandemic?
To be honest, people keep asking me those questions, and I don't really know. Like it was just there was an opportunity, and I was like, yeah, sign me in. Like I'll go there and help. And at the beginning, I thought I was so focused on like, okay, what's going to be my job? What am I going to do? What is my role? And at some point I realized like, it's not about going there to like optimize the routine and, handing out medication as quick as possible and so on. It's also about taking the time to like care for the patient, and I spend probably half of my day doing more like social stuff, like taking my phone to like FaceTime a patient's family, and they haven't seen their family for the past 12 weeks. So it's like it's a beautiful moment, because it's also the first time that those people are seeing human without a face mask, a visor, gloves, gown, and all that stuff. Yeah, most of my day is not really like a medical task per se, but it's really more just helping wherever help is needed.
Has this experience helped you reevaluate or think about your life after football and where you want to specialize within medicine as a doctor?
No, I don't think so. I think I'm still focused on emergency medicine. However, like working as an orderly, working as a nurse assistant, you learn so much about what those jobs are all about, and as a doctor, like you prescribe stuff, you say like, yeah, please give medication like crushed 3 times a day, blah, blah, blah. But you don't actually do it, and to be the one, doing the blood draw in the morning, putting the IV, putting the urinary catheter and handing out medication, like you actually see all those steps, and you're the one who actually are the closest to the patient. And I feel like that experience is going to help me eventually, as a physician to really understand and understand that it's a team effort. Like you're not just out there doing everything by yourself. It's with the help of, the orderly, the nurse assistant, the nurse practitioner, yourself as a physician. That's what it's all about. It's team effort.
It's a team, right?
Yeah.
One question I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, both as a doctor and as an athlete, how do you think football can come back from this pandemic safely? What is your perspective on returning to the field and returning to practice even?
I think my guess is as good as yours. Like I'm not a public health or an epidemiologist specialist at all. The way I see it, there's still a lot of things we don't know about that virus, and the more we learn about predisposition and risk factor, male, African American, obese people are more at risk. And when you look at the NFL population, there's a big part of it's a big part of the sample, and so we gotta be cautious. I think we can't just say like, oh yeah, we're young and fit, so we'll be okay. Plus, like, there's also I feel like we got to be accountable towards our fans and making sure that we don't become a vector of propagation of the virus because we go from state to state, from city to city, on a week to week basis. So I feel like there's a lot of consideration. Like I said, I don't know what it's going to look like. But I know there's a lot of people at the NFL right now and the NFLPA that are actually working on this. And I've been like really privileged because I've been able to sit on those meetings and listen to those people. And there's a lot of really, smart individual crushing down the numbers and trying to find a way to make that work.
Right. We just had a really good question come through. Where do you find your drive and motivation? I mean, you're doing so many different things day in and day out. How do you find that motivation to just keep going?
I think I just try to find some positive in everything that I do. I was talking to you about the long-term care facility, how my first few shifts I was devastated because everything was negative. Everything was, the only positive thing is if you actually stay there and live, and it's not even a nice environment, so why would you do it, kind of thing. But then you try to dig a little deeper, and then you realize, like, you know what, that patient who hasn't got an haircut for the past 12 weeks was able to get one because I was working that shift. And then that patient was able to FaceTime his wife and talk to her for the first time in 12 weeks. Like, you got to find the positive. You got to put yourself into the patient perspective, and you got to, I want to say, like, attack everything. And that applies to medicine, it applies to football. Like, when there's adversity, when there are challenges, you got to face them, find a way to make it work, and surround yourself with some close friends, some relatives, some family members, and talk about it and make it work. And that's actually crazy. It just makes me think, like, my sister, who's also in medical school, is now working in a long-term care facility as well.
Oh, wow.
And that really changed the way I approached the whole deal, because now I was able to, like, talk with somebody and relay to her experience and my experience, and just that sharing made it so much easier to, like, come back home and just go and lift, go and train, go and do a conference like this after a long day of work. Like, it's just, when you're able to, like, decompress and share your experience and share your adversity with other people, I feel like it's way easier to move on to the next chapter.
Yeah. And I think that's an important message. We've got a lot of coaches watching this webinar, athletic trainers watching this webinar, student athletes, people who right now would be used to practicing, being with their team, and are trying to find that positivity, try to find that motivation. We've got students who, couldn't do their graduation. So just to echo that message of finding positivity, staying self-motivated, talk to others is, what's going to keep people pushing forward. I can probably speak on behalf of everyone that's on this webinar. Just thank you for all that you do on the front lines. That goes a long way, I'm sure, to those families and those people in those long-term care systems. So we appreciate that.
Thank you.
I definitely want to shift a little bit over to just your career in football. How did data, or I guess did data, play a role in your career pre-NFL?
Well, pre-NFL, because I was going to say yes for sure, but pre-NFL, I want to say I didn't get maybe that much access to data just in general. Sorry about that.
No worries.
So, but for sure, when I got to the pros, like, when you look at Pro Football Focus, when you look at all those platforms that you can use to, like, track how much you're running in a day, like, are you well hydrated, all that data is actually what allowed you to perform at the highest level, and also to prevent injury. And I feel that it's key. It's key, whether you, like, break down film and try to, like, analyze your opponent and know exactly what's going to happen. Having the data and being able to, like, sort through that data, like knowing exactly like, okay, on third down from like 8 to 10 yards to go, like what are the chances I'm going to see that type of pressure, that type of blitzes. And when you're able to like sort all that data and organize it, it's everything makes so much more sense. And then you got to find like your way of looking through that data. Like when you look at stats from a game or an opponent, like you got to sort it in a way where when you're on the field, you're able to remind yourself, like, okay, it's 3rd and 8. I'm at the 25-yard line. They're probably going to come with cover 0 because they want to like push me out of field goal range. You know, like you got to remember that stuff in a really like stressful environment in front of like 80,000 people. So in order to be able to do that, I feel like you got to come up with your own system of sorting out data.
So going into the NFL and now being introduced to all of this data, do you think that has really helped you as a athlete in understanding different downs, different opponents, who's across the line from you?
Oh yeah, no, for sure. Plus, like I'm a cerebral guy, so I love numbers, you know,
Yeah.
and I love, yeah, I love like looking at something and be like, okay, this is 1 out of 3, one out of 3 chance of that happening in that situation, and that feeling of being able to anticipate a blitz because of subtle safety rotation or something like that during, you know, a game is really rewarding. Like, yeah, every time that happened, it feels almost as good as when you like pancake somebody, you know,
Yeah.
20 yards down the field. It's really a cool feeling.
I bet. Thinking back to your early playing years as a lineman, how do you think data or even just head impact data could have helped you better understand mechanics of keeping your head up or just getting off the line quickly, since that wasn't something that you had access to in high school or in college?
Well, I'm like I said, I'm a really cerebral guy. So to be able to like see data, let's say we talk about head impact monitoring, um, and seeing like, let's say a coach is making a correction to make my technique better and prevent like head injury, and actually seeing the result, you know, from a spreadsheet saying like, look, since we did that drill like twice a week, the number of head impact has decreased by like 20%. I think that would have like resonate with me a lot more, you know. And sometimes like when you're young, you have the feeling of like, well, does he even know what he's talking about, kind of deal, you know, and you want to do your own thing. But to be able to like compare your data pre and post like a certain drill, a certain exercise, or certain like neck strengthening exercise or whatever, I feel like it would have maybe uh, I think maybe I would have reacted better, and made for sure like it would have helped me transition better to the pros as well. And you know, as a doctor, I think you got to be concerned with, you know, concussion and head injury. So also being able to kind of screen, you know, individual on your team, especially at the youth level where you don't necessarily have like a doctor on the sideline or a neuro trauma consultant, and being able to say like, hey, number, you know, 76, you got a pretty big hit. Like, stay on the bench right now. Go talk to your parents after, and if you have any symptom, go see a doctor. I feel like those tools are critical, you know, if you want our kids to stay healthy.
Yeah, you brought up a good point too about just trends, right? Seeing your technique and how you're performing. Because I think the biggest thing that we're all trying to avoid is unnecessary head contact. And if we can see through data that we're taking a lot of unnecessary contact, whether it's impacts to the crown of your head or just impacts to your head in general, that data is what will help us drive change within our technique. But the important part is, well, now what does that data look like after we've made those changes?
Exactly. Yeah, for
Could be
sure.
seeing that decrease in head impact exposure. And it's simple science, right? Like less head impacts to your head, risk mitigation, right? We're
Mhm.
reducing the risk of head related injuries. So um, was there a point in your football career where you felt just the mechanics and playing safer just kind of clicked for you?
Yeah, and I think, you know, getting to the NFL was a big part of that. You keep hearing people from the NFLPA saying like your risk of injury in the NFL is 100%,
Mhm.
and they're right, you know. And I've seen, you know, after 6 years in the NFL, so many career being terminated because of injury, and not necessarily because they're career-ending injury, but because you do get injured, somebody take your spot, that person is costing less money and doing as good or even better of a job, healthier, and here you go, you're getting cut the year after. So it's such a competitive business that if you're able to like stay on the field, I feel like you increase. If you stay on the field, you stay healthy, you play, and you also make sure that somebody else is not, playing and getting some good film out there. So I feel like those are the key to like success and to get a long career.
Yep. No, I completely agree. Now, do you think head impact monitoring has helped change the way youth or even just student athletes at the high school or collegiate level can now participate in football safer?
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's something that, you know, to a certain extent, like head injury could change the way we play football, or even like change whether we play football or not in 50 years from now. So to be able to do everything we can to reduce those impact and to make sure that we better diagnose, better treat people that suffer concussion is for sure critical. And when you're able to do that at the highest level, it's fine, but only a small percentage of athletes get to the pros. So you got to be able to give better technique to the youth, to the high school kid, to the college kid, to make sure that there's even more people that actually can get to the pro because they're healthier.
Right.
At least that's how I see it.
No, that's a really, really good point. How do you see data being used in other ways to improve athlete safety and performance? You mentioned a few other things like workload. You mentioned things like the probability of downs. Do you see data becoming more and more of an important tool, not just at the NFL level, where we've probably seen the biggest introduction to data, but now starting to move to like the collegiate level where we see some at those power conferences, but then down to the high school? Do you see that kind of becoming more apparent?
Yeah, no, for sure. And if you ask somebody what is data, I would be curious to know what they're going to say. But to me, data doesn't have to be, captured through like a super special sensor and all that stuff. Like just like weighing yourself before practice and after practice to know how much water you've lost, and then you can weigh yourself the next day before practice. And then you just know, like, were you able to rehydrate yourself? That's data. And
Right.
that's super important and easy to collect data. So I feel like you don't have to necessarily buy like the high grade sensor and blah blah. Sometimes like really simple stuff do work, and I think we need to implement those easy steps at the youth level as well, in order to make sure that they don't get heat stroke, which is it can have devastating consequences as well. So there's simple stuff that we can do when it comes to data that can really change how an athlete is going to play on Sundays.
Yeah, and I think there's, like you mentioned, there's a difference between having data, but having actionable data as well, right? There's one thing for just having numbers and for knowing something, but where it becomes valuable is where a coach, a player, an athletic trainer can look at something and say, I've got an opportunity to improve here. And I think that's where, the more companies can focus on actionable data that creates either a focus or balance on safety and performance, that's where we develop this kind of winning solution for programs to help kids play longer, play safer, play smarter, and hopefully win more games.
No, for sure. And the word actionable data actually summarized everything I was trying to say since the beginning, like by sorting it and making it so you understand it and everything. Like that's the key. Like there's just you can get data on so much stuff, and at some point it's almost like clouding your judgment because there's just too much info out there. But you gotta be able to like have KPI that are sensitive, specific, and kind of act on it for sure.
Yeah. And it's real interesting for me. I work with a lot of youth programs, and I work with top university football programs. And, at the youth level, it's very basic information, right? They want to know who are my top 5 opportunities within poor technique, hardest impacts, and it's basic, smaller subsets of data, quicker actionable insights, and that works great for them. But then you look at some of these top college programs and they're exporting spreadsheets, running pivot tables, comparing offensive line to defensive line. So it's really interesting to see how certain levels have started to embrace data. And with our company, you know, this is still kind of a newer concept, head impact monitoring, right? And so what's been interesting as well is to commercialize something that starts out very basic, like I mentioned, with just top 5 opportunities of what's most important. But now a lot of those programs are coming to us and saying, hey, it'd be really neat if we can start to compare games versus practices, compare our linebackers from this year to our linebackers from last year. So now those coaches or athletic trainers who were kind of getting their introductory to data analytics at those youth or high school levels are now the ones helping lead the progression of what the future of data analytics might look like, because of where they see value and how that data helps them drive change within their programs, so they can develop that balance between how my athletes can be safer but also play better.
Mm-hmm. No, and I think also sometimes, you know, we only look at the athlete and we're like, oh, this athlete has a poor technique, this athlete doesn't tackle the right way, and so on. But it's, you mentioned the coach and you know, tracking from one year to the other, but like,
Right.
if you're bringing a new coach in, or if you like follow a coach through like different high school or different colleges, and you see like how his class of linebacker are performing, I think it can tell a lot about how that coach is teaching, and what is the technique that he's teaching. And at the end of the day, that plays such a big role, you know. And I feel like, and that's my personal opinion, but I
Yeah.
feel like sometimes, you know, we're blaming the athlete. We're like, oh, he targeted with his head, $15,000 fine. But at the end of the day, if that player is still getting a plus on his grading sheet, well, there's an issue at some point,
Mhm.
you know. And I think that's a big part of being able to like track data, is to be also able to compare from player to player, but also from cohort to player that were coached by, you know, a specific coach to another coach.
Right.
And
Right.
that's where it also get really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, we talk a lot with high school programs and youth programs, of course, where the foundation of tackling is really starting to be introduced, whether it's tackling or blocking, right? And, you know, today there's such an emphasis on rugby style tackling, keeping, you know, heads up style tackling, where the goal is to remove your head from contact. Most importantly, it's crown of head from contact, because if your head's down, that's, we know, is a significant higher risk of head, neck, or spinal related injury, aside from just improper technique. The gap that we find sometimes is that it's one thing for the coaches to teach a certain technique, but the way that the athletes perform on the field sometimes differs, whether it's a game or practice. The data is what helps identify where those you know, where those missed techniques are. Is there a player that has a tendency or a habit to use his head versus a player that doesn't? So that's where the data almost creates visibility to things that you can't see through standing on the sidelines or through watching in film, a lot of the cases,
Mm-hmm.
especially at a high school level where you don't have an entire video crew breaking down film, and or youth where they don't even have film in some cases. So it's been really interesting and you know, exciting to see, as you know, we can track, you know, impact exposure throughout a season and seeing the significant decline. Once you can measure something, now you can manage it, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And you were talking about actionable data. That's what it is. You know, when you're able to like see result, like, and it becomes almost like science. You know, when you're able to like prove that your technique is more efficient and decrease the risk of an impact. I think that's the biggest. The biggest job is already done, because you're able. I feel like you're able to better also convince your player that what you're teaching is actually working. You know, and it's working on the field, but it's also working to protect them and make sure that they stay healthy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
Um, what, I don't know that I've ever asked you this question, but what interested you to athlete intelligence, and why is it important for you to be on the advisory board?
Well, we've been working together for what, the past 4 years, I think,
Yeah.
maybe even 5.
15, 16,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, the moment you guys approached me, I felt like it was such a great opportunity for me because I'm always a little bit of a paradox, studying medicine but also playing football. And even for me, sometimes I gotta ask myself, like, is it sound, what I'm doing? So to
Mhm.
be able to like work with a company like you guys, or sit on the NFLPA health and safety committee, it's really a way for me to provide my kind of unique perspective to that field that is evolving so quickly. Like I remember in 2016, we were talking about, can we basically try to diagnose concussion with those sensor? And now we're talking about, improving technique and looking at trend and stuff like that. So that field is evolving so quickly, and it's just like, it's an honor to be part of it, and if I can provide some insight about whether a mouth guard is with a sensor is too big, too small, because I actually play with it, well, then
Mhm.
it's even better,
Right, right. Do you think football teams should consider head impact monitoring and take the next step to learning how it can benefit the safety and performance of their athletes?
No, I think for sure. And there's already last year, I think, was the first year that 4 NFL team, or maybe 2 NFL team, were wearing mouth guard with
Mhm.
gyroscope. Is it how you say that in English? Gyroscope.
Gyroscope, yeah. Yeah,
Anyway,
you're good.
sensors.
You're good. Your English is great.
Anyway, so yeah, so I was one of the player who was actually wearing one last year, so I wore one for the whole season, and it was not, the data was not available to us yet,
Mhm.
but it was more like a pilot program, and now I think they're gonna implement it to even more player, more teams, and it's great. I think it's the future. If we're like looking at body fat and weights, and we're tracking everything the way we track in the weight room, there's no reason not to track head impact on the field, because at the end of the day, that's what's going to make sure that we stay healthy.
Mhm.
And I mean, I don't want to advance myself, but I'm sure we could also find correlation with like other injury, like knee injury, or because when you have poor technique, you're more likely to injure yourself, and when you're concussed, and for those people who do stay on the field when they are concussed, they're more at risk of injury as well. So everything kind of tie in, but it start with your brain. It start with your gray matter that allows you to move the way you move on the
Yeah.
field. So it's like crucial to track that and to try to act on it to preserve, make sure that people stay healthy.
Yeah, it's interesting too because at the youth level, there's a lot of organizations that have seen a reduction of participation rates because of concerns around head-related injuries. But we find when we go to a youth program and that youth program implements a head impact monitoring solution, and they can go to the parents and say, hey, football has its risks. Everything that we do in life has its risks, but here's what our organization is going to do this season to make sure that we're tracking and managing impact exposure. So while these athletes don't necessarily know good technique from poor technique, they can instill good habits at such a young age in the hopes that as they progress through the levels, they'll develop that muscle memory.
Hmm.
It's a lot different from us probably working with a youth athlete and having them train a certain technique sometimes versus going to an NFL athlete and saying, hey, you're doing it wrong, right? There's probably sometimes some differences in how one might respond to that.
No, for sure. And to come back to what you were saying, I think there's also a big difference between risk and uncertainty, not knowing. And risk is just a normal thing in life, whether you look at the stock trading or buying a business or playing on a football field. But when you do know what are the risks, and it's a risk you can tolerate, and it's a risk that you can act on to decrease it, then it makes just more sense, I think.
Yep. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that data is going to become more apparent in some of these younger levels. And I don't know that I'd be surprised if in, a couple of years, a head impact sensor might be the next required device for football players, you know. I think that's kind of the route that we're going, but we'll certainly see.
Yeah, and then you need the sensor, but you also need the comprehensive platform, which is, I think, which is one of your strengths. You know, it's one thing to collect the data, and there's a ton of sensor out there, but to be able to like sort it, track it, you know, group it the way you guys are able to do it through your platform, I think that's the most important thing, because I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that or program that would be willing to spend money just to say that they're doing it. But it's one thing to track it, but like you say, like the data can lead you in any, like pretty much every direction depending on how you're treating it. So to have a platform allowing you to better understand what it means, I think it's super important. Plus, like, football coaches we're not, but I'm not a football coach. But anyway, you're not necessarily a scientist either. So to be able to do it in a simple way, like you were mentioning, like the 5 biggest thing that we can act on, I think that's great, you know, because it's easy, it's straightforward. You can, you know, talk to a parent and be like, this is what we're doing, bang, 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 and this is what's gonna, you know, have the biggest impact. So no, I think it's great, and that's one of the reasons why I like working with you guys so much, is because you're kind of the bridge between the science and the people, you know, the people in the general population, the young athlete that want to play, the parents that want to understand, and I feel like with a platform like you guys, it's that you guys have, it's just easier to do that, to understand what's actually going on.
Well, and a big point to that is, you know, it's not about the sensor, it's not about the device, it's about the data, and it's about data visualization. It's about comparative analytics and trends, right? If we see, you know, that an athlete took 15 crown of head impacts in a particular practice, you know, versus the amount of exposure of crown impacts throughout the rest of the week or previous weeks, that might be more of an anomaly than a trend, right? So we're trying to look at these trends, because trends are going to tell us habits. And then when we put corrective measures in place for those athletes, adjusting their technique, how they block, how they tackle, and then can track that over the next week or 2 weeks, that's where we can start to really see, am what I'm doing as a coach being followed through with those athletes? And we see a lot of that. You know, I always talk about a local high school that we work with, where their first week using our system, they got our report, and the top 5 athletes that were taking the most amount of crown of head contact was their freshman lineman. So the coach looks at the report and says, I know exactly what we're doing this week. And for that entire week, he worked with them on specific drills, getting your head up, getting your hands up, getting off the line quickly. The second week, they got their report and they saw a 29% reduction of crown of head impacts. So the first report kind of became that identifier that we have an opportunity here. The second report pretty much became that validation that what the coach was now training his athletes is what was being followed during those practices and games throughout that period of collecting data. So we hear stories like that all the time, and I think that's what coaches and athletic trainers and even athletes are looking for, because everyone wants to get better and everyone wants to play safer.
Yeah, and in order to get better, you got to be able to stay on the field.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
No, for sure.
Laurent, we're kind of getting a little bit short on time here. Is there anything that you want us to know about you, or anything you want to talk about before we say see you later?
No, yeah, I think we cover a lot, you know, from my background of playing football to the data and the actionable data and everything. Honestly, for me, it's really been a privilege to work with you guys, and I hope to keep doing that in the future. And you know, we're talking about the platform and the data, and for me, like, my ultimate goal of a platform would be, you know, for an athlete to be able to log himself in and see his trend in terms of impact, his hydration, his weight before and after practice. And then he could complement that with what he's eating and what his technique is and how heavy he lifted, before practice and stuff. And, integrating everything together would, I think would be the ultimate goal. But I know it's not for everybody either. Like, it's not everybody who's like a nerd that loves to look at number the way I do. But I really think that's going to be key to optimize our performance and to keep getting better as athletes. But I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and thank you for the invite.
Yeah, of course. I think, going back on that last comment, I think athletes that are going to want to get to that next level or get better, as long as, if that benefit outweighs the time effort of putting in the weight, put it in the work, analyzing, what he's eating, I think it'll be worth it. And I think a lot more people will use platforms like that as they can track and see improvements within their own performance. So lots of things that, we at Athlete Intelligence are looking at. Today, obviously, we're very focused on what we feel is most important, head impact monitoring and performance tracking. We're really excited about our Q+ sensor that launches this year, which will have a few additional add-on modules. One is the helmet
body temperature. Yeah.
Helmet temperature.
I'm really looking forward to see that. I think that's going to be key. And we were talking about heat stroke. Like, for me as an athlete, every time I leave Montreal to go to training camp in Kansas City, that's one of the most concerning thing is like the heat, and the humidity and everything, and being able to train in those environments, which I'm not necessarily able to do when I'm here. And I'm really curious to see that sensor, because heat stroke are really can have really like devastating consequence.
Well, we see when, an athlete's temperature is also increasing, their performance is decreasing, right? So it also provides another opportunity for us to show various trends. And when an athlete isn't properly hydrated, are they taking more head impact? So lots of exciting things that we're going to be launching there. We also have some exciting new launches with GPS monitoring and looking at things like workload. And again, looking at when people are outside of that acute chronic workload ratio, how does that affect the performance? How does that affect head impact? So lots of exciting stuff. We always appreciate your feedback. We appreciate you being a part of this. For anyone that's watching, feel free to go to Athlete Intelligence to learn more about what we're doing, how we're helping teams improve safety and performance. You can also contact us at info@athleteintelligence.com. Set up an online demo, learn about what we're doing. It's purely educational, and we look at, if there's a good fit for what we provide for, any particular programs. We're going to really be focusing on doing more of these webinars at once a week, so stay tuned. And Laurent, thanks again for your time. Greatly appreciate you taking time out of your extremely busy schedule. And I look forward to chatting with you again soon and staying updated on how you're holding up.
Awesome. Thanks for the invite, and stay safe, my friend. See you soon.
Yes, sir. Take care.
Bye.